Well, happy Friday, everyone. Um, I hope everyone had a great week, and I hope everyone's doing well. I hope they're not all going too insane with so a lot of places have extended the stay-at-home orders for the lockdown and so forth. So, you know, hang in there. It'll be over soon. Um, Aside from that, like I said, I hope everybody had themselves a great week. Hope you're looking forward to a relaxing weekend. And here we are for another Hobby Hangout. Uh, it also, I want to wish everyone a very happy and blessed Beltane. Um, and so here comes summer, folks. Um, Aside from that, yeah, um, I have a few different projects ahead of me for the night. We're going to be here for the next like 2 hours, so till about 11 o'clock Eastern. And I'm going to be working on a few different things depending on kind of where we go. I have a bunch of sort of in progress projects. Still working on that group of nights. Haven't really gotten much progress done on that through the week. I did get started on that big lava worm commission that I was talking about last week. I I haven't been posting any pictures of it yet because the gentleman that uh, whose commission it is, I gave him kind of like a couple of little teaser pictures of some of the early stages of what was going on, but otherwise I'm trying to sort of keep it on the DL, as the kids say, and not spam it out to social media because I'd like him to be a little surprised when he sees it. And um, so anyway, that's uh, that's why that's been a little bit quiet. But aside from that, like I said, I've got those nights I'm working on. I have this little Necromancer guy that I put some pictures of the build for the model and his base and so forth up on my Instagram. Links will be in the description to Instagram and so forth. Um, and so I've got him, I've got his base to work on, and then I've got a few little odds and ends to kind of fill some time. But realistically, I'm not expecting to finish all of that stuff tonight. So chances are the little stuff is just going to kind of wait for some other time. And that's basically what it's there for. Little filler projects, so that if I'm waiting for paint to dry or something like that, I've got something else to kind of fill with for a little bit. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It looks like my wife is in the YouTube chat. Hello. Um, and so, yeah, aside from that, I figure in the spirit of Beltane, I'm going to, my libations for the evening are going to be the remnants of this wonderful bottle of barrel-aged mead from Crave Mead in Blackstone, Mass. Easily one of my favorite meads in general, but as far as local meads go, it's definitely one of the better. So this is mead, just regular honey mead, but it's aged in whiskey barrels for about a month. So it's got a wonderful taste, nice and warm. And since I have no bonfires to jump over to ring in Beltane, I'll get my warmth here. So bring on summer. All right. So I guess that's pretty much it for the intro here. Yeah, I guess we'll jump in. I have been doing a little bit of sort of tweaking to the stream here, playing with some new software, trying to get things a little bit more in the direction that I want them to be in. So I guess hopefully everything's working that I've done so far, but I guess just let me know if you see any particular problems with anything or if anything's not showing up. But one of the big improvements here is I have this lovely new downward-facing camera. We'll switch over here. And so now you can see what I'm working on, which is essentially what I've been going for largely this whole time. That's been my goal. Oh yeah, that's good stuff. All right. So see if I can kind of get everything on frame here. The Necromancer here, I put like a base coat on his robes. He's got the purple base coat and the black of the cowl. And I did that, I don't know, a couple of days ago. So like I said, I'll be working on this guy a little bit. I want to put some highlights onto the robe and the cowl and start painting all of his various and sundry little details. He's got a little face with a blindfold. He's got his staff with the keys. There's a little skull on his robe there, his hand, his hair. And then he's got a couple of little, I don't know, pieces of parchment or something like that sort of stapled to his robe. I'm not entirely sure what they're there for, but I don't know, maybe it's a reminder of where he put his keys. Although, considering they're hanging 2 feet from his face, then again, he does have a blindfold, so, you know, maybe he just can't see him. Anyway, the base is this thing right here. Set of stairs to match the wonderful sculpt of that robe. You got a few skulls on there because, you know, he's a necromancer. There's got to be skulls somewhere. And then this candelabra piece here is a bit from the it's a bit from the Night Haunt chain rasp horde kit, and I basically just clipped it off the guy that had it, shaved off the hand that was holding on to it, and jammed it into the cork for the stairs, and there you go. So like I said, we'll be sort of painting this up tonight, most likely. And aside from that, I've got the purple robes to do on this horse, and most of the other horses need the black interior of the robes done. So I'll probably be trying to hammer through some of that as well. And that's basically the plan. So grab the palette here, pop the lid off, and I put in some fresh paper today because it was starting to look a little shoddy and starting to run out of space. So now the unfortunate thing is with the setup that I have right now with this downward camera and everything, the light that I have sort of illuminating my workspace here blocks my view of the camera, and I've already punched it twice trying to grab paint or put paint away, so I'm not 100% used to it being there yet, and hopefully I don't punch it again. It tends to take a little bit to reset it when I do. So this is not by any stretch an advanced setup, and maybe I will take a picture of it and post it on my Instagram when all this is over tonight, so people can see what I've got going on. But it's basically like a pressure clamp, like a squeeze clamp for woodworking, stuck to the shelf on my desk, and then I took an elastic band and attached the webcam to the clamp so it's aimed down at my desk. And it's about as basic and sort of you know, low tech as it gets, but you know, for now it's working, and hopefully it will continue to serve its purpose for a little bit, and then when it's time for an upgrade, then we'll do it. But I think this will definitely serve its purposes for now. So the wet palette, if I haven't explained this before for people, it's there's a sponge underneath the paper here, which holds all the moisture, and then this is like a very thick, like porous paper. A lot of the times you can also get away with using parchment paper because it's just porous enough that it lets like moisture through, but it doesn't like flood through, if that makes any sense. So it's nice because it keeps your paint wet and workable for a substantially longer period of time. Um, and that is a wonderful thing. So let's see, break off a little piece of blue tack here. We're just gonna pop this on top. Sort of an impromptu painting handle, some Gorilla Glue, and then we're gonna go ahead and pop this little horsey on that blue tack, and we're good to go. Yeah, so there we go, and we'll maybe move this aside a little bit so we've got a little bit more space, and hopefully that's vaguely in the camera. And we just start slapping some paint on it. So yeah, I picked up a bunch of these knights for, this is for my Legions of Nagash army for Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and I got a bunch of these from a friend of mine. It's a friend of mine's brother-in-law, and he plays Nighthaunt, which is one of the other undead factions, and they have a kit between the two that is, you can build it one of two ways. So you can either build it as a Hex Wraith, which is basically like a ghostly, think of it like a mounted Grim Reaper kind of thing. Like they're just like a flaming Grim Reaper. They've got scythes, and they just kind of ride around trying to chop people's heads off. So the other way that the kit builds is as these Black Knights, which are just more, sort of more, you know, think medieval cavalry, but it's skeletons. So it's your more traditional sort of knight with lance kind of thing. And they don't really share any of the same bits and pieces except for this horse. It's the same horse that the two riders ride. So he had built them out as the Hex Wraiths. So he had used the horses, but he had not used the riders. And so I had been talking to him, and we worked out a trade for those horses, or for those riders. And then it was just sort of an easy thing to pop on eBay and pick up the horses themselves independently. You get a lot of bit sellers on there that will sort of buy a kit and then break it up into its respective bits and pieces and then sell those all individually for a substantially cheaper price than just buying the kit outright. Of course, if you were to buy all of the bits and pieces to make a full kit, it would be at a markup compared to, you know, the actual like retail of the kit. But, you know, they got to turn a profit somewhere. But if I can, like, instead of paying $25, $30 for this kit, if I can only pay like 10 to 13 for the horses, and that's a pretty good deal as far as I'm concerned, especially if that's all I need. So, and because I've purchased a few of these kits over the years for myself, I also have some of the Hex Wraith riders lying around on sprue still. So what I'll probably end up doing, because I also have a Nighthaunt army, it's a much smaller sort of fledgling army, but it's there. What I'll probably end up doing is working on buying more of these at some point when I get to it. You know, like there's no particular rush on that. And realistically, I can only paint so many horses at a given time before I start to go a little mad. All right, so we're going to let that coat dry. Where did my paper towel go? We're going to let that coat dry, and I'm just going to pop over and see what's going on. If there's anything going on in the chat. No, not particularly. But there you go. bounce back over to this. All right, so we are working away here on the knight. That purple's had a little chance to dry. I'll go back in, slap on another layer. I generally like to paint these things from the inside out, as they say. So you'll notice that I started with all of the bone, and I painted that first. That is the deepest portion of this model. It's the sort of the innermost layer, if you will, of the sculpt. And it's always, I find, a lot easier to start there so that you don't try and paint that and then get stuff on top of all the other layers that you put on. You can be a little bit messier with it, and especially since for ease and speed of painting that bone, I did a little bit of dry brushing on it, and you know, it allows you to sort of be a little bit more messy with it, and you don't have to be super neat and exact, which helps, especially when, in my case, I'm painting up like several of these at one go. I'd rather not sit there and pour over, you know, trying to be super careful on highlighting the bone and all that stuff. So being able to just kind of hit it quickly and get it done and move on to the next step, which I can then take a little bit more time and care with, then that's pretty much it. My little sip of mead. Oh, that's good stuff. Very good stuff. Let's see here. What do we have going on? All right. So my thoughts on the Necromancer here. Obviously, purple plays a major role in the color scheme of my army. And then black and gray is another big part of it in terms of like the cloth. I was debating with myself, trying to figure out on his little staff here if I wanted to do that in just sort of like a plain brown, which I may, or if not a plain brown, do maybe something a little like a muted dark, let's see here, something like this. So like a muted dark teal kind of blue-gray, and that might be, it might work well with the purple, and then I don't know, I guess beyond that I haven't really put a ton of thought into it. Just kind of trying to figure out what would look good for this guy, make him stand out a little bit, but not like too much. The problem is then balancing the colors, and I think if I were to do the blue, I think it might stand out a little too much, and if I don't really have, between the model and the base, I don't really have another way to tie blue into the project. And I like to try and balance the colors across the composition of the model in general. Now, that being said, there will end up being a couple of pops of color that aren't super balanced, namely the little skull at his, right down here, at his, like the base of his robes. The way it's sculpted, the skull cap has been cut clean, and it looks like it's filled with something. So my plan is to just make it like a skull chalice kind of thing, like maybe it's a ritual implement or something like that. So I'm going to pool some blood in the top of the skull. And I think that'll be suitably grim. And then yeah, aside from that, the like one of the big pop colors in the army itself is let's see, where is it? This super bright blue. And I've been using this largely to represent magics, particularly like necromantic, you know, sort of death magic in general. So one of the ways that this is sort of spread through the army is like all of my skeleton warriors have this color glowing in their eyes. You can see it in between their ribs. And so that's a big part of it. So all of the skulls on the base here, the 4 skulls on the base, are going to have it in their eyes, as if like he's emanating the magic, and it's sort of like not necessarily animating the skulls, but permeating them, and just sort of like, you know, they are collecting that magic in a sense. And my goal, I don't know if I can pull it off, but we're going to try it, is before I paint, after I paint his face, but before I paint the blindfold that's over his eyes, I'm going to attempt to paint a little bit of this same light blue color sort of into the recesses around the bandana, and maybe even like a layer over the top. And then I'm going to take the bandana color and really water it down and do like a glaze over the top, so that it looks like his eyes are glowing underneath and kind of glowing through the fabric a little bit. It's a super small detail, and I don't know that I will be able to pull that off. But you don't know if you don't try. So we're going to give that a whirl when we get to it. The other thing I'll be doing is the flame on this candelabra is going to be the same type of blue color. It's going to be like a white, dark blue flame. Unfortunately, I don't have an example close at hand. I could get up and run across the room, but I'd rather not. I will say, however, I have posted pictures of a similar type of flame on my Instagram and, of course, Facebook as well. So, that being said, if you want to go check it out, it's there. So, all right, we've given this a little bit of time to dry, and we're going to come back in and just hit it with another layer. We're just trying to build up a nice, smooth, strong coat of purple. And then we'll come back in and we'll shade down the recesses and bring in some highlights. But I think it all starts with a good base coat. Nice, smooth base coat. So I'm using thin down paint. It's pretty thin down, just like the water absorbed from this wet palette helps to innately thin it down a little bit. But I also added just like a tiny bit of water in like a moist brush, and that just kind of gives it that little bit of extra thinness to it. I do also, I've mentioned this before, in my rinse water in my cup here, and then in my wet palette itself, I do also, along with the water, mix in a little bit of flow aid. And I like to think that that helps a little bit. I guess I haven't really done any scientific anything to really test whether or not it's as effective as I think it is, but I think it helps sort of smooth things out when you're putting it on, as especially as like a base. And then if you're going to do any like thin edge highlighting or anything like that later on, it really helps it flow off the brush, I find, and does a pretty good job of doing what it needs to do. I don't know, I'm grossly out of frame here. All right, note to self. Let's see if we can move this down like here. Do one of these, that's a little better. Probably going to take me a good while to figure out exactly where the good spot is for staying in focus and staying sort of in frame here. I'm used to not painting on a camera, so I'm used to just kind of getting real up close to it. Shove it right in my face with a light on it so I can see exactly what I'm doing, but I think we're managing okay. Definitely could do a little better with keeping it in frame, that's for sure, but you know, comes with time, comes with practice. All right. All right, brush and rinse here. Now, while this is drying, we're going to switch gears a little bit. And while it may not look like it, I don't know if it does or not, I have already painted the stone on this, this base to sort of match the stone scheme of all of the other stuff I've been doing, at least for this army. So I think my plan is to start in on the skulls and then the candelabra. And I think once that stuff is done, I think the base will be more or less complete. I don't know that I'm really going to do too much else to it. One of the things I have done on a few of these pieces of stone that I've painted, like those ruins, those big ruin sets, is I've used a very dark blue wash. Just select on a few stones here and there just to kind of make them stand out and break up the gray a little bit. So I think I'll probably do that on this before I call it done and just sort of like hit a few of these like cobblestone looking bits here and there just kind of randomly, and hopefully that will help make it look a little bit more natural, I guess, that sort of natural variation in stone, because it's not obviously all one monotonous color of gray. But at the same time, it will aesthetically help to tie in the bits of blue around the model just by adding slightly different shades of blue, and it will, you know, break up, like I said, the sort of boring gray bits. So anyway, let's see. Recently, I've been using, where is it? There it is. I've been using this sort of pale flesh beige color as my base for bone, Rakarth flesh from the Citadel paint range. I've been using this a lot as a base. In fact, all of the skeletons were all done using this as a base, and then I end up putting a sepia wash over all of it, and then a couple layers of lighter dry brushing to sort of like bring it up. And that was on the horses. For the skulls here, being that they're small and already on painted stone, I'll probably not dry brush them and probably do just sort of some layers of some of the lighter bone color. We'll probably layer up with Screaming Skull here, which is like a very light sort of beigey cream. And then, almost punched the camera. Where are we? Is this it? Yeah. And then we'll probably end off with Pallid Witch Flesh, which is another Citadel color, but this will end up being sort of the triad of colors used. I don't know if you can really see, but this is the sort of dark creamy base, and then here's your bone mid color, and then your highlight color. And then the wash in particular that I will be using is Seraphim Sepia here. So that being said, we're going to switch over to a slightly smaller brush here, I think. So this might be smaller than what I need, but it will definitely do the trick. Jump over, see if there's anything going on chat-wise. Well, nothing really going on in the chat at the moment. Let's see. Crack into this. Looks like I'm going to need a new pot soon because I'm starting to run low. I do tend to use a fair bit of this stuff. It has lasted me a while though, so that's a plus. Alright, pop that back. A little dip of water. Alright, we'll start in on some skulls. Alright. Now I think, as I've been sitting here kind of working on this, I've also been trying to figure out in my head why trying to go live on Facebook wasn't working at the same time as here on YouTube. And I believe my issue is because I have my stream running through OBS, and I have that going. I had that going first. I believe I needed to start up Facebook first so that I could adjust the camera, because I think I had them both set to using this same camera here, but they should be two different cameras. So basically, the problem with Facebook, well, no, sorry, it's not a problem with Facebook. I guess if anything, it's a problem with OBS. But the problem, as I see it, is OBS only outputs to one source at a time, and I like what OBS is doing in terms of, like, you know, giving me the picture-in-picture and the little bit of text on the screen. I'll be doing, as time goes, I'll be adding other little bits of text to the screen, as well as the ability to switch to seeing the chat and interacting with the chat just in OBS, so that I don't have to switch like to the browser page and find it and, you know, hope that it's not super laggy and all that jazz. So, but like I said, that OBS program only outputs to one source at a time. Now they do make a few different services, programs, websites, and the like that will essentially re-stream your stream. So I've been looking into it a fair bit over the last few days kind of leading up to this, and most of them at their either free or basic options would allow you to stream to multiple services simultaneously. But that list of multiple services, for whatever reason, does not include Facebook Live. Facebook Live, I don't know if it's just because it's a very popular forum for posting this kind of thing. It's easy to reach an audience, maybe. But whatever the case is, it's behind a paywall on virtually every single one of those programs. And as it stands right now, I'm not really in a position where I want to start shelling out a bunch of money so that I can simulcast. So what I would have been doing is running two streams on my computer simultaneously and basically opening up my browser, and from my browser streaming from my what is essentially my face cam here, which is my laptop camera. And that would have been the only feed on Facebook. So Facebook would miss out entirely on the downward cam and on the desk cam here, which is not ideal. But you know, of the two, I guess I would rather pump the what I'll call the good signal to YouTube at the moment. So, all right, so those skulls are starting to look a little bit more like skulls. What's that brush? All right. Bumping over to check the stream, make sure everything's going okay, and hopefully it's not. Can't really tell if the audio's any good. I can't really tell if the picture's any good. So here's hoping. Here's hoping it's doing good. But I guess we will wait and see. I had a near catastrophe last week's stream. I in my infinite wisdom and my sort of like pre-stream rush around and so forth, trying to get myself situated and ready to go. I had everything set up, and it was just a matter of all I had to do was hit stream on both Facebook Live and YouTube. And I thought I had hit stream on both, and when the stream was over, I went to go shut everything down and realized that on YouTube, which, as I just mentioned, is ultimately the platform I am focusing on at the moment, I had not hit stream. So I ended up, fortunately, I had saved the Facebook stream, and I was able to then basically upload that as my video for the week. Definitely not the ideal situation. You know, I was definitely kicking myself for it, but it worked out. Maybe not as smooth as I would have hoped, but it was all right. Sort of a lesson for the future. That's why today I made sure that when I hit stream on OBS, I made sure that yes, in fact, YouTube was streaming. But as I just sort of mentioned, because they are fighting over the same webcam, which realistically they should not be, because they're fighting over the same camera, when I went to try and go live on YouTube, it would not let me. I'm sorry, not YouTube. When I went to go live on Facebook, it would not let me. So, obviously, there's still a few kinks to work out here, but that's all right. We'll get there. This is, after all, only my 4th video, and I think so far we're doing okay. I'm content, at least. The way I see it is, as long as whoops, way off again. The way I see it is, as long as like each stream shows some modicum of improvement, then I'm happy. And the improvement over last week, in this case, is A, I actually remembered to hit stream on YouTube, and B, because of the playing around with OBS over the last like week or so since the last video, I think the overall sort of level is a little better. So I guess you guys will have to let me know in the comments or in the chat. You know, let me know what you guys think. Let me know if the video quality is still good. Let me know how the audio is. Let me know pretty much any feedback is welcome. I guess constructive feedback is the ideal situation. You know, just yelling at me and saying this sucks Doesn't really do me any good. I mean, it lets me know it's not any good, but it doesn't really give me any direction in which to improve, I guess. So. All right, so we just threw a layer of the same color as the bone base color onto the 3 candles on the candelabra up here. Again, it sort of helps to spread that color around. The other place this color is going to appear is on the, actually realistically it might end up as a base coat on his skin, so on his hand and his face. And I might even sneak it in, I don't know, I might try a slightly different color. But it might end up being a base coat on the fabric as well. Of the blindfold. And then it basically becomes a matter of, because this is such a light color, the stuff you add on top of it, so in this case, if you add a glaze or a wash or something like that, it's going to change that color's appearance. So for all of the bone here, and likely the candles as well, I'll be using this sepia color. For the hand here and his face, I will probably be using a more of a reddish flesh color. So Reichland flesh shade, for instance, is probably going to be something I try and use. My vampire's flesh tone is like a pale bluish white. But obviously he's a vampire, so he doesn't have like warm blood actually pulsing through his veins. Because this guy is a necromancer and he's not actually dead, he is going to have a little bit of actual blood coursing through his veins. So he's probably a little pale and a little sickly, which is why I'm going to be using the pale colors as the base, and I'll be using pale colors to sort of like layer up the flesh. But I'd like to get at least some reddish undertones in like the face and hands, and since that's all that's showing for skin, that's what I'm going to be using this for. The cloth, on the other hand, is just kind of going to be like a dirty sort of beige color. So again, I'm probably going to start out with the same color as the base, but then maybe use like a dark brown wash for that. And then, like I said, I'm going to be trying to mimic the appearance of like the pale blue glow from his eyes coming through the fabric. So I guess we'll kind of see how that manifests. It'll probably just be a matter of doing a little bit of glazing. It's just a really small target to try and glaze. So I don't know. My brush control is still not quite where I would like it to be, but we're doing all right. So anyway, so that's kind of what I'm thinking here. So actually, while I've got this guy in my hand, he's got a skull on him. So we're going to come in and we're going to color that. And make sure we're staying somewhat in frame here. Get the skull cap that's kind of kicked off to the side. Come at it from another angle. And that's the benefit of having like a painting handle like this. The I do like, in general, I like this Citadel paint handle. It's pretty comfortable to hold, but I have fairly large hands. My bear paws, as I like to call them. And so I find it's a little bit small for my hand, realistically. I do have, where's a good example? I don't know if I have one within arm's reach. Oh, here. I knew I had one somewhere. I do have like these like extra large pill bottles This one is old razor blades. It's in a pill bottle because it's childproof, so if my daughter gets a hold of it, you know, she's not going to pull out a bunch of razor blades and have a real bad day. But yeah, I have, and then I'll just like throw some blue tack on the top of that and then stick whatever model to that. And that's worked out pretty well, especially if it's like a larger model. The problem is like if you get like a real skinny model like this and you put it in the middle of something that's that wide, you end up having an issue sometimes getting in and painting like the details. Like this guy in particular, because of the way he's sculpted, that would be much less of an issue. But you know, it would certainly be problematic in some situations. So kind of depends on the model, depends on what I use for painting handle, but this one does see a fair bit of use. And as I mentioned before, this bit here, which sort of expands to fit larger base sizes, it just unscrews from the top here. And generally speaking, I just pop this thing off and then throw some blue tack on the top here and then stick the model to it. But in this case, and in the case of a lot of these horses and the riders, there's no real good flat surface to stick down. So I took this plastic tube, which is actually, it covers the end of this brush to keep the bristles from getting damaged. But I covered the screw with that and just kind of like forced it down on top there and kind of threaded it in. And then there's blue tack on top of the tube that's then stuck inside of this guy's robes because it's just hollow on the inside of this model. And that's how I sort of fixed them on there. So in this case, it works out pretty well. But again, I wouldn't mind if this came a little bit larger. Maybe if they, I don't know, decided to produce an XL series or something like that for people with larger hands. But ultimately, it works. You know, it does the trick. It's just maybe not as comfortable as it could be. Now, there are a lot of other companies out there that make painting handles in general, and I will probably reach out and experiment with some of those. But for now, this is what I have, and it does a pretty good job. All right. So now we are going to get his little hand here. I was rather pleased with the progress I was able to make in such a relatively short time on the commission I'm working on. As I think I've mentioned before in one of these streams, and if not, it's, you know, I'll mention it now. But I own an airbrush and I have used it a little bit. Typically, I am using it for just priming models, maybe throwing down like a base coat of something, but typically it is not like a heavy rotation item in terms of like my painting arsenal. So I kind of challenged myself a little bit with this commission, and I said, okay, this is a good opportunity. It's not like a ton of like tiny details. You know, it's a lot of like big open canvas. Let's experiment with the airbrush. And so I did all of the blending and like base coating and undercoating on the model with the airbrush, and I think it came out pretty darn good. Obviously, there's room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. I'm certainly no professional with an airbrush, but you got to take those first steps, you know. And so this was sort of one of my first steps, and it gave me, if nothing else, it gave me the courage to apply it to other projects. So, for instance, I have, let me see if I can pull it onto the screen here. Maybe we'll, you know what, we'll do one of these because I can. We're going to switch back like this. And it'll be easier for me to do this. Bang. So I have this Skaven Pestilence Start Collecting box for the Skaven army. And of course, it's got a ton of plague rats or plague monks. And when it comes time to paint those things, like most horde armies, I find it's easier to sort of batch paint them in sort of stages. You know, take like, I don't know, 5 to 10 models, give or take, kind of like I'm doing with the knights here, and just do like a big chunk of them sort of all at once. And so that's the plan with that. But what I'm probably going to do, because it's mostly robe, is do all of them with the airbrush for the robes, and then for, you know, the finer details like the faces and the hands and, you know, any sort of like weapons and stuff like that, go back in with a brush and then, you know, put the finishing sort of touches on them with that. This is my second one of these kits that I have. The first one is built but not painted. And then this one, I built the monks, but I haven't built any of the rest of the stuff in the kit yet. And I actually have the, what is it? They came out with a split army box last year, I think. Yeah, it must have been last year. What was it called? Carrion Empire. That's what it was. Which was Flesh Eater Courts versus the Skaven. It was a different clan of Skaven, but a friend of mine bought that box for the Flesh Eater Court half, and as payment for doing a commission for him, he traded me the Skaven half. So I have that not built yet because the commission for him is not finished yet. That's up next on my to-do list after my current commission. And I mean, he was kind enough, like he didn't need it at any particular time, so he was just like, there's no rush on it, get to it when you get to it. And but that is, I feel like, you know, now is as good a time as any to you know, start getting that done. But being a man of principle, as I am, I have not touched the Skaven half of that box that he gave me, because I feel it's like receiving payment in advance for a project and then spending all of the money and then not actually fulfilling the project. Like, that's not a cool way to do things. So I'm basically not allowing myself to tackle that stuff until I finish his commission, because, you know, I'm not a dick, basically. So that's the situation there. Anyway, back down to the desk, and we'll get back to Voight. So we're gonna swoop in here and get his face while we're in here. And I'm not being terribly careful with, you know, like, obviously I don't want to get anything on the purple or on the hood, but if I get a little thing, you know, a little bit on the on his hair, that's fine. I haven't painted that yet. Realistically, that's probably going to end up being a super pale color anyway, so if I base coat it with a little bit of this pale color, it just means that it's going to be easier to paint it later. So, not the end of the world. And I think realistically that I'm just going to go for like a really pale gray. Not like, it'll probably be white in the highlights, but ultimately I want it to just kind of be gray. The idea is, again, he's a necromancer. He is infused with undead magic, like, you know, death magic and stuff. So I assume he's probably not crazy healthy. And, you know, so that sort of like lifeless, desaturated gray just kind of makes it look like he's maybe traded a little too much of himself for the power that he wields. I don't know. These are the stories I write for myself in my head. Speaking of which, I was working on a name for this guy. Because I like this sculpt and always have liked this sculpt. He just has so much presence and like an ominous sort of vibe to him. I think that he is probably going to play the role in my army of the sort of master necromancer, which in terms of like actual gameplay doesn't mean anything. It's literally just sort of like a title that I'm giving him. But much like I like to play Dungeons and Dragons and write fun backstories and lore for that, for my character, and you know, I like the world building aspect of it. And because I'm trying to work on an Age of Sigmar narrative campaign that is essentially just a giant exercise in world building, I figured it would be a good idea to give my heroes names and a little bit of personality. So again, I have been thinking about giving this fellow a name. I just haven't quite settled on one yet. I want it to be, I feel like it needs to be, like, I kind of want to call back to the Vampire Counts Warhammer Fantasy Battles era armies, and like the von Karstein vampire lineage. You had Vlad von Karstein as like the leader of that particular bloodline, and then you had Manfred von Karstein, and I think there was an Otto von Karstein, and there was a bunch of different von Karsteins. Isabella, his Vlad's wife. So because of that, like I kind of want that sort of Germanic name in the influence in the name. You know, like having the you know, Von something or other, whether it's his surname or maybe it's like where he's actually from. But it's the first name is what I'm sort of struggling with. You know, I was thinking maybe Gunther, but I don't know. Gunther has a certain appeal to me, if for no other reason than back in the day when I used to play World of Warcraft. One of my first characters was an undead warlock by the name of Gunther. And so I feel like it would be a fun sort of like harken back to that, even if it's only sort of like an inside reference that I would get. It has a nice like nostalgia factor to it, and I'm pretty all about that, I guess. So painting a skull, painting a skull. So it looks like his hand is base coating up pretty well. The skull is base coating up pretty well. I mean, we're getting real nice thin layers on there. His face is, I mean, technically speaking, it's base coating well in that they are nice thin layers, but it is just taking a lot to build that color up. It is a very light color, and even though it's considered one of their base paints, so it's supposed to be a little bit more highly pigmented and it's supposed to cover a little bit better, I am going over a fairly dark undercoat. So it is taking a couple more layers to get where I want it to be. That sort of opaque flesh color. But we're getting there. I think we're only going to need like maybe one or two more coats. In the meantime, We will let him dry. I'm going to bounce over and see real quick if there's anything going on in the chat. And then we'll bounce back, pick up the base, and start working again on the skulls here. Again, just making sure we get a nice thin, even coat and a nice opaque, even distribution of color and pigment. Another delicious sip from my Beltane beverage of choice. What do I do with that base coat? There it is. And I do also have a nice cup of coffee, which is probably pretty cold by now. I made it right before the stream, and it was a little too hot to drink at the time. But as I'm sitting here chatting away, it is growing colder by the moment. But I also don't think that mixing the mead and the coffee sort of on my palette at the same time, not my painting palette, my flavor palette, it's not necessarily what I want to do. So we're going to finish the mead and then probably just drink cold coffee, which, you know, not ideal, I guess, but coffee is still coffee. We're about halfway through our stream for the night. Still just kind of chunking away at this. I am not by any means a fast painter. At least I don't think so. I don't know, maybe somebody, I am so off camera again. I am, like I said, not, I don't consider myself to be a particularly fast painter. I don't know, maybe compared to some other people, I am lightning fast, but I somehow doubt that. Especially sort of over the grand scheme of things. Like, my approach used to be, and this is in the time BC, which is before children. In the time BC, I would paint like roughly a mini a day. Like, I could sit down and easily start to finish a mini in a given day. And in theory, if I'm only painting one mini, then I guess I could probably still manage that. But it's a lot more interrupted now with a near 2-year-old running around. You know, her recent favorite pastime is trying to scare the crap out of me by eating crayons. And so I'll be turned around doing something, not necessarily hobby related, could be anything. And if she has crayons, while I'm watching her, she will be like just running around with them in her hand or coloring on one of her coloring books or something like that. But the second I turn away and she realizes I'm not watching, she immediately tries to cram the crayon in her mouth and eat it. Which I haven't quite figured out why. Specifically because every single time I catch her doing this, she has the most disgusted look on her face, and it ends up spitting out all of the crayon, which is, you know, I'm grateful for that she's not trying to swallow the crayon. But as to why she's doing it in the first place, if it tastes bad, I guess I don't really know. I think she may have a couple of teeth coming in. That's my immediate guess. And she's basically trying to use because she has so many teeth right now, you know, the crayon is a nice narrow thing that she can jam into the gap where the tooth is coming in and then just sit there and gnaw on it for a little bit. And I'm assuming that brings some form of relief to her. So in that regard, I guess I can't be too mad, because I guess I'd rather her chew on a crayon than be in pain. But at the same time, there's got to be better ways. When she's got like Technicolor drool, it's a sight to behold. I think I'm still managing to be grossly off frame here. All right, candles are looking good. Skulls are looking pretty good. I think maybe we can slap a little bit more on this one, just under here. Make sure we get the underside of his little scully ridges. His cheekbones and his jaw. Now, the one thing I'm still kind of trying to determine is what color am I going to do the candelabra. My sort of gut instinct says go with gold, or some combination, like maybe the shaft is like a silver color and then the actual like candelabra bit on the top here is in gold to get like a two-tone thing. And that may be the way to go now that I think about it. And the reason I say that is when looking at the actual model itself, the keys here and the ring, I can do the ring in silver and maybe the keys in gold to tie those colors into the candelabra. And then there's a couple of little, what looks like nails, which doesn't really make any sense, but we'll call them studs. But the parchment that's on his robes here, which actually I should probably base coat with the same color, of this light color here. But those nails there, or the studs or whatever, I will do in a silver as well to match the ring up here and the little bit of chain. And then the base post here on the candelabra. And then we'll do the gold up on top here for the actual candle holder. And then the keys we'll do in gold too. And I think that will be sort of sufficient for bringing that color around. I don't know. And I might get real sneaky and try and just freehand a little ring on his finger, like maybe just in gold, just do like a little line on his finger, so it looks like he's got a little bit of bling, and again to kind of spread that color throughout the model a little bit. So it's not a bad idea. We'll keep that one floating around. All right, yeah, I think I like where those skulls are at. All right, let's do the flame. That needs some kind of a base coat. So let's go with Celestra Gray from Citadel, which is a light gray, but again, it's a base coat, so hopefully it will cover a little bit better than trying to use like a super light color over. Because ultimately my plan is to sort of base coat the, once I put this on to bring it to a light color, I'll be going back over it with a color called Ulthuan Gray, which is it's actually the same color I use as the base for the vampire skin, and whatnot. But it's like a very pale, like white blue or blue white, and yeah. So we're just putting this on a flame right now. Is that? Oh, look at that! I managed to keep it in frame too. Oops! Did I just? Yep, we just got some on the candle. That's all right. We'll go back in and we'll clean it up. The nice thing about paint is, especially when you're putting it on in thin layers, it's easy to sort of go in and clean it up. You just paint right over it. So I just wiped off the excess. Avoid the brush a little bit. Go back in and wipe, and it sort of sponges up the excess paint that I had in there. And anything left, I can just go back in with a coat of that Rakarth Flesh color I did the candles in, and just bring it right back to where it needs to be. Especially since we're still in the base coat stage, it's nice and easy to do that kind of thing. Now is the time you want to screw up, basically. If I had shaded and highlighted those candles and they were all 100% done, and then I went and did that, I mean, I guess it still wouldn't be the end of the world, clearly, but it would be a little bit more problematic, let's say. All right. So, I like where this base is going. I like it a lot. You know what? Let's get that dark blue shade I was talking about. And we're going to work on some of those stones. Just bringing out a little bit of color. You know what? We're going to go back to our larger brush here. We don't need to be crazy detailed, but it also lets us soak up a good amount of that color. So we'll just kind of dunk it onto this palette here. A little easier to control how much is on the brush. We only need a little bit on there. In fact, we'll wipe it on there. Just to, oh, see? I knew it was only a matter of time before I punched that thing. Doesn't seem to be too bad, though, so we'll just kind of go with it. Alright, so I like the idea that this stone has blue. Like so. Just pick up a little bit more of this. There we go. And that continues down on the front side here, like so. And then I like this one to be blue. And I have no real, the only thing sort of dictating which ones get there is I want it to be spaced out and random looking, but at the same time I want it sort of evenly dispersed throughout the whole of the base. So if like I only have one here, but then a heavy selection of it down here, that's not quite what I'm looking for. I want it to be a little bit more, you know, again, kind of evenly dispersed. Let's bounce over and see if there's anything going on chat-wise. Not too much at the moment. It's fine. We got somebody watching. They're hopefully enjoying themselves. Let's say that this is all one stone, and that is all going to be blue. And this blue color is nice in the stone, like mixed in with the gray. It sort of gives the appearance of like slate or something like that, you know. Which, since that tends to break down fairly, you can break that into fairly thin bits. I think it works for topping off stairs. You know, it makes sense from a logical standpoint and from a sort of, I don't know, again, world buildy standpoint. Sometimes it's nice to base some small details, even though it's a very fantastical miniature. It's a, you know, a death mage, necromancer character, you know, and obviously that's not a thing that's real. You know, it's still nice to kind of base some portion of the model in something that could be familiar at the very least, if not considered real. Let's see. You know, this piece here, even though it's going to be covered up by the model, it's calling to me, so I'm just going to paint it. And if by any chance it happens to show, at least it's done. And that's probably one of the reasons I'm a slow painter, because I paint things that don't need to be painted. And then we're just going to kind of jab some of this blue down here. Yeah, I think we're looking pretty all right there. Let's maybe put a little, what do I think? What do I think? Let's do this bit right here. We're going to put some right in here. And even if it's not for the stone purpose, we're going to crank some into this recess too, just to kind of give it a blue shadow. One of the initial goals I had for this army, I'm going to tuck some of that blue into the other shadows too. One of the initial plans I had for this army was that I wanted it to be from sort of the, like a cold north snowy region. For whatever reason, when it came time to actually do the basing on these guys, I basically threw that out the window. And they all ended up on like sort of muddy brown bases. And, you know, I still think I want them on snow, so I might go back. Like, you can easily add snow. And the fact that they're like muddy brown bases just looks like the snow is maybe melting, and it's just sort of like wet earth from that. So, not the end of the world. But, all right. So I think you can see on camera there that we've got a little bit of variation now in that stone. And I've tucked some of the blue up into the shadows there in the dark recesses. And we'll just kind of let that sort of soak in, and I don't know, and then it's done. Or at least that sort of portion is done. We'll pop some right in there behind that skull. I think one of the reasons actually that I bailed on, to a point at least, I bailed on the whole paint it like it's cold scenario is I have had a difficult time figuring out, and I think this is just sort of a matter of where I am in my artistic, you know, sort of like painting journey in general. I would consider myself to be still fairly novice. You know, like I've picked up a few tricks here and there, but overall, you know, there's a lot of tricks I still need to learn. but one of them is just sort of like picking out the right colors. You know, and I think like if I, for instance, instead of like using like a warm or sort of like, you know, off-white color um, to like highlight or mix into highlights, if I used like that same color I was talking about earlier, this one here, the Ulthuan Gray. I don't know if you can tell on camera here that that's got like a just a tint of blue to it, but it's basically like a, you know, a blue white, right? Like super super pale white, or a super super pale white blue, right? But if I mixed that in as my highlight color, that sort of hint of blue might be enough to sort of suggest to the mind that, hey, it's real cold here. Like maybe it's ice crystals forming on like something. You know, who knows? So that is something I may revisit at some point. You know, a lot of the stuff that I'm painting right now, specifically, um, it's for an army that I'm just sort of trying to. Uh, I think I've kind of reached a point where I'm just trying to get it done, um, because I want, like, I've set myself the task of finishing this army before moving on to the next sort of like overarching project. Now, when I say finishing, I don't mean like every piece is like 100% up to the level I want it to be. It just needs to be at at the at least sort of like a tabletop ready kind of situation. Um, and I can always go back in and push the shadows deeper, push the highlights higher. You know, if there's a blend that I don't quite like, I can go back in and sort of like adjust it after the fact. So they're never done per se. You know what I mean? Like if I learn a new trick that I think would be especially good on like a certain model, I can always go back and do it. I've been sort of retrofitting, for lack of a better word, retrofitting some of my earlier stuff in this army. Like the first batch of skeletons I painted, for instance, I painted all of the cloth red because realistically, I wasn't planning on making it an army at the time. I was just wanted the skeletons for D&D. And I thought that the red cloth would look kind of cool, so they were done in like red and gold. And it did look cool. Well, that's the thing, is it looked warm. It was a bunch of warm colors, and they looked more lively, for I guess lack of a better way to explain it. Um, because of the reds and the golds and stuff like that, it brought a lot of warmth, and I wanted them to be, you know, skeletons that were in a sort of cold environment. Um, by the way, right now I'm bringing in that sepia wash and just doing a light wash on these skulls. I don't want to flood them. Ultimately, I'm just sort of trying to warm them up a touch so that I can cool them back off. So it'll be warm in the recesses and the shadows, and then it'll be a little cooler um, and brighter elsewhere in the highlights. But anyway, um, I had used like a darker brown wash on all of the bone, and then I used gold and red, like I said, for all the cloth and the metals and stuff like that. You know, so it had like an aged copper look to it, and they looked nice. I liked them, but when I ultimately decided that I was going to expand it into an army, and I decided that I wanted to do the army in like with purple as a main color. So the idea was purples, dark teals, dark blues, the bright blue as like the pop color for like symbolizing death magic in general. Um, and yeah, and then blacks and grays and stuff like that. And I was going to do uh, I wanted all the bone to be like a whiter, sort of like bleached bone. Like obviously bone is still has a little bit of that sort of like, you know, off whitey beige color to it, which is why that's kind of where I start. Um, but then I add a lot more of like an end in a near white bone color. Um, because in my head, and I don't know that this is necessarily, you know, true in the real world, scientifically speaking, but in my head at least, for um, bone that's like left in a very cold environment, like the cold and the sunlight and stuff like that is going to scour them and keep them much more sort of bleached looking, and they're not going to end up like real dark. Um, they're going to be a lot lighter. So again, I don't have any like, haven't really done any research on it, I guess, but I suppose I could look up pictures on Google or something like that. But I have not done that yet. So I am content with them looking the way that they do. But that first batch of skeletons, I will be going back and painting all of the fabric purple and painting, you know, like the bone to be a little bit lighter. And there's basically a full repaint on those. Some of the earlier units I did as well, like I didn't have that inner blue glow on all of the models, you know, in the eyes and the nose, you know, like coming through the rib cage on a lot of them. Like I have, I don't know if, oh no, there's no way you're going to be able to see that on camera, but let's see, this guy has, for instance, he's got his, the eye on the wolf is done in like that blue glow, and you can barely see in his rib cage, in the hollow of his rib cage. I've done that in like a blue glow coming out of the other eye socket here, the empty eye socket, again, like the blue glow emanating from within the skull. So it's like that's the magical essence that is sort of animating the creature. So anyway, I need to go back in and add all of those elements is basically what I'm getting at. And so we'll get there when we get there. But as long as I don't, like, the thing I'm aiming for is not gray plastic right now. And as long as I can hit that goal of, you know, like mostly base painted and at least like base colors and a wash and a like single layer of highlight or something like that, then I will consider that sort of good enough for the time being. Close this wash before it ends up on my lap. But yeah, I will consider that to be, you know, good enough for the time being. And then like I said, I can always come back and revisit, change the things that I want to, add more. When it comes to paint, it's difficult to take it away, but you can always add it. So that's my sort of plan going forward with this army and with all of the other armies that I'm working on as well. This is my second sort of large army. My first, and you know, it's almost like a, you know, you always remember your first love kind of situation. But the Chaos Army Nurgle was the first army I ever picked up and really sort of what got me into this game in the first place. And so I thoroughly enjoy it. And I haven't played it in a while because we were working, my gaming group and I were working on a Path of Glory campaign, which sort of enabled me to use, I was using my Legions of Nagash for that campaign, and it enabled me to sort of slow grow that army so that as I gained new units in the campaign, I could then, you know, like acquire a pack of whatever that thing was and get it painted up and ready for the table. Because we usually play once a month. first Saturday of every month we get together and play a game. And obviously, you know, with the lockdown and the quarantine and all that nonsense, we have not been able to do so, which is, you know, a shame. But obviously, our health is slightly more important than a tabletop war game. All right, time for a little bit of silver. So I actually just picked up this color. It's Vallejo metal color steel, and I got this recommendation in particular. One of my fellow, well, sorry, not fellow. I say fellow as in like that makes me sound like I'm on the same level as him. He is somebody that I look up to, both as a painter and as a YouTuber in general. But Vince Ventruella, and I will make sure that I link to his channel in the description of this video. But he swears by this like paint line for the metal color specifically for metallics. And having compared this now and used this color a couple of times compared to some of the other metal, like I've got these Games Workshop Citadel metal colors, you know, in a variety of different colors and shades, and the Army Painter paints as well, and it's like no contest that this is like the superior metal paint. The pigment is a lot finer. You get a lot better coverage. You can work with the paint in terms of like being able to, like, you know, mix it with other colors and blend it with other colors and things like that. So it just works really well. And those other brands, their metal paints leave a lot to be desired. So anyway, gotta give this a solid mix. We're gonna hit the candelabra. So we just need a little drop. Oops. Well, just got some on my new shirt. That's a shame, but whatever. Such is the life of a painter, I guess. It was as I understand it, it was a fairly inexpensive t-shirt, so I'm not going to be too mad. All right. However, my wife did purchase me this shirt, so hopefully she will not be too mad either. In the grand scheme of things, ultimately, it's just a black t-shirt. Not the end of the world. Yeah. But the main thing I like about this paint is, you know, its finish. When it's done, it looks like metal. You know, like a lot of the metal paints you see, like it looks like just glitter paint. You know, like the pigment is just big and chunky, and you can see from, like, you don't have to get real close to it to see the individual flakes of pigment. Like you can see the light catching it and reflecting off of each individual piece, and it just doesn't look nice. You know, like it doesn't have that sort of like polished metal look to it. But like, I don't know if you can see how that's, like, even just in the reflection there, you don't really see any sparkle. It just looks like a reflective piece of metal. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's one of those things that you notice it when you see it sort of like in comparison, and unfortunately, I don't think I have anything to compare it to nearby that was done in another metal paint. This is a fairly recent purchase, that being said, but all of my other painted stuff is stored away right now. So the only stuff on my desk is stuff that's in some stage of work in progress. Well, once again, I am well out of shot. All right, I think I'm pretty happy with that in terms of coverage, and got it up where we needed it to be. Now, unfortunately, this is the only color I have picked up in this paint range so far. So I will at some point need to pick up a gold. And there's like a, you know, there's a bunch of different colors, like a bunch of different colors. But I'm kind of going in order of the colors that I use the most often. So this is like a dark silver. There's a bright silver that I'm going to be picking up. There's the gold. There's probably like a copper color. And I find that those tend to be the colors that I gravitate to more often than not. And then really anything else, like either by mixing in other paints or mixing in inks, you can adjust the shade, adjust the tint, things like that. Okay, so what color? Let's do. And I guess this will be because I don't have the gold, or in this case, this is Balthazar gold, which tends to come out more like a brass, bronze, something like that. Normally I would put this on a dry palette because with this paint in general, you don't want it to be like super watery when you use it. But because I'm painting just such a small little area, I don't think it's really going to have time to separate. At least that's the hope. One side. And the other side. Now, for anybody that's tuned into any of my earlier streams, you may notice that, and I am definitely noticing as the silence hits in between sort of thoughts here, but there's a conspicuous lack of music. And I think it was too quiet in the early streams, and the audio did not pick it up. But I had some music going in the background here. But in my last stream, the audio did pick it up, and then of course it got flagged for copyright. So it's not a huge deal because, you know, like I'm not, like they basically just made it so that I can't monetize that particular video, which none of these streams I'm trying to monetize at all. When I start pumping out, you know, sort of like standalone videos in my other two series I have planned, those I will attempt to make something off of. So there will probably be some kind of, you know, advertisement at the beginning, and maybe something at the end. Hopefully there won't be, like, I don't know the options yet because I honestly haven't looked into it. But hopefully I will have an option not to put a ton of videos in the middle, because I know personally as a consumer of YouTube content, there's nothing I hate more than, you know, having like that one video that's got like 6 ads throughout the course of it. So All right, I'm going to jump back to the silver color because I got a little bit of the gold where I didn't want it. So I'm just going to cover that up. And it's like it never happened. So, like I said, this is particularly small. So I don't know if it's going to show up particularly well. I'm trying to get it to focus on the piece and not on my hand. So I don't know if you can tell the size of pigments. Probably not. It's just looking like glare at this point. But as somebody who's just sort of like looking at it now, like there's almost like a texture to the copper color, or at least it gives the visual appearance of it, because you can see like the individual little flecks of pigment, whereas with the metal one, the steel color, you cannot. So it's definitely why I like that metal color. So if any of you out there also paint minis and you're looking for a good metal color, that is the best. Vallejo metal color. It accepts no substitutes. All right. So that candelabra is looking pretty good. I like it, at least. So we're going to let that dry, and we're going to switch back to our Necromancer friend here. You know, I think I have decided that I'm going to use a sort of, I guess, a muted brown color. It's not super muted, but it's desaturated, I guess, is the color I'm looking, or the word I'm looking for. It's almost like a gray brown. I don't know what the undertone is in this one in particular, but not unfortunately, I'm not as good at picking that stuff out as some people. My wife, for instance, being an esthetician by trade, is incredibly good at seeing colors as they are. Like, obviously, I look at this and I go, oh, that's brown. And I can look at it next to another brown and be like, that's a different brown. But I guarantee you she would be able to look at this brown and tell you what the undertone is, you know, and I don't have that skill. So she is very fortunate in that regard. And that probably, I'm assuming, comes with time and practice, looking at skin and makeup and all that sort of thing. But that is not a skill I possess. Certain colors I can do it with. You know, like, obviously it's easy to look at that Ulthuan gray color I was holding up earlier and go, oh yes, that clearly has blue in it. But, you know, like I have, for instance, there's another brown that I have. It's a dark brown, again, Citadel paint range, Rhinox hide for those that know the color. And that's definitely got, like, you know, it's a much more reddish brown, but it's like more of like a purple red than anything else. So it's like a purpley brown. And it's a very nice color. But not like for this wood, for instance, I want it much like him. I want him to have that sort of like he's had a little bit of the life drained out of him. I want this wood to sort of look just old and withered. So we're going with this color in particular because, like I said, it's a little bit more muted, a brown. I feel like it's almost got a little bit of, you know, I don't know if it's just gray mixed in with it or if it's like almost a tinge of blue to it. But I think I'm going to try my earlier suggestion to myself and mix in a little bit of that Ulthuan gray to do some of the edge highlighting on it. And we'll see what that does. Otherwise, I think I'm going to do the, I might try and do a little bit of like wood grain and just do a little bit of like a light gray on it so it looks a little bit more aged and like play up that gray aspect of it. So actually, while I've got this Celestra gray on my palette, I'm going to hit his hair with this. I feel like that's a good, for a pale gray hair, that's as good a base coat as any. It also stops you from introducing too many weird colors. Like if you use the same color on a bunch of different things, it sort of ties the piece together a little bit more. And I wouldn't necessarily consider this a limited palette that I'm using in terms of like colors on this guy. But by limiting myself to not adding any like more colors than I absolutely need to or feel I need to. Oops. Just got some of that gray on his robes. Don't want you there. Scrub, scrub, scrub. There we go. That's a little better. It's time for me to get a new brush. This one is losing its point. Sorry if I'm kind of going quiet here. This hair is very sort of fine little bit of detail, and I'm trying not to get it on the hood or on his face on the other side. And as a result of me trying to concentrate, I'm kind of going quiet a little bit. It's not really intentional, but all right, we're going to pick up a little bit more of this purple over here that I still have on my palette, and where I messed up on his robe a little bit, we're going to just tuck in there and try and neaten that up a little bit. There we go. All right. Let's go back to our flesh color. And we're going to put another on his face. I'm just noticing the time, and it is quickly winding down in this stream. Whoops. Oh, we're good. So once this stream ends, I will continue working on this guy. We'll see how far we can get him tonight. I had a fairly late night last night and then was up early for work this morning. So I'm relatively tired, but I still have an entire cup of coffee that I have not consumed yet. And so we will still have some fight in me left. But you can see how this guy is starting to shape up with his different base coats on. And realistically, I am pretty pleased with how he's turning out. Now, put that Celestial Gray. All right. Now my goals in the upcoming week for in terms of painting is I'd like to put in some more time on that commission this week, and we'll see how much more I can get done in that regard. I do have a week's worth of vacation coming up soon, so anything I don't get done regarding that commission before then, I will have an entire week in which I can get a little bit more done. That being said, I might actually, depending on, oops, actually no, that's not so much of a whoops. That actually turned out okay. Depending on, I guess, situation for that week in particular, I may try and get like a bonus stream in on that week, sort of just during the week sometime. Maybe even if it's just like a Facebook Live kind of thing, just pop on and paint for a couple hours. We'll see. Like I said, it very much depends on how things go with the week in general and whether or not I have the ability to do it with wife and kids. So, but if time allows, I'll try and sneak one in. All right, so that's looking good. Jump back to our metallic here, and we're going to just hit the ring, chain. If we get a little bit on the keys, it's not the end of the world because we still have to paint those, which we're going to do with that same bronzy, brassy color. This is definitely tricky to see at some points because I'm painting a little, because I'm trying to keep it in frame. It may not seem like it, but I am trying. But it is much further away from my face than it usually is. And so it is a little bit more difficult to see some of these finer details. And as such, it is a little bit more difficult to see exactly the placement on my brush and get that brush control, that fine brush control down. But I'm trying to just paint on that ring, and I think I'm doing an okay job. I don't see a ton of sort of fallout. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now we'll come back over to our bronzy color, which has probably been sitting on this wet palette a little bit too long. And I'll just kind of Quickly paint in these keys. This is definitely going to take a couple of coats because this metal paint is, like I said, it kind of tends to thin out to a point where it breaks a little bit sooner than it ought on a wet palette. So you get a lot of separation and you get a lot of they just get super watered down. So the pigment, because the pigment is not super fine and it's not very pigment dense to begin with, when it starts to thin out, it really thins out. So you struggle to get the coverage that you need. So it takes a few more coats than it might otherwise with a different paint. Of course, if I hadn't put it on a wet palette, I wouldn't be having this problem in the first place. But I am impatient and did not want to break out a dry palette for this, even though I have one somewhere around here. So, doing okay with these. I don't know if you can quite make out the keys there. Trying to get them to reflect a little bit so you get the different metal colors in there. But we definitely have a cool two-tone metal thing going on. So we're just going to do another coat on the back side of these keys. And it just hit 11 o'clock, so we are going to switch over real quick and do our little outro real quick. And then I will, once this is all done for the stream, then I will come back and see what I can do on the rest of this guy. All right. So, take a little breaky break here. I'm going to switch over. All right. So, that's it for tonight. I appreciate anybody that was coming by, either watched this live or future viewers as well for coming by and checking this out, spending some time. I hope any sort of like insight that this may have brought was helpful. I hope it was at the very least mildly entertaining. Yeah,